Probably the biggest news in this version of Service Suite is that we have implemented multi-factor authentication for servers in Linux login and privilege elevation. Part of our mandate at Centrify is to make sure that we provide multi-factor authentication everywhere that it matters for IT administrators and for end users across our entire product portfolio, including Service Suite. Hubert will give you the details about this, but in a nutshell, when a user, an IT system administrator, wants to log into a Linux server, the Service Suite administrator can now require an optional step-up authentication or multi-factor authentication for that user. This is very simply designed to protect your infrastructure, protect users' identities when passwords are stolen or guessed. We've had many customers come to us over the past year especially and say, look, we have domain administrators in our environment, we have people with highly privileged accounts. We know that if those passwords for those accounts were to be compromised, we're in a very bad position. Can you help us? The answer is yes, we can today with Service Suite 2016. This is tied in directly to Centrify's zone-based management infrastructure. That makes it very straightforward to enable a group of computers or a group of users to be challenged with multi-factor authentication. In a Linux environment, again, it's very simple. The Centrify administrator, both for privilege elevation for commands and for roles that are assigned to users or computers, determines whether or not there will be multi-factor authentication. Our cloud service delivers the policy back down to the Centrify Service Suite agents, which you can see in the second step actually create the challenges for the IT system administrator right there at the Linux command line. This is terrific because it means that your IT administrators don't have to learn anything new. They don't have to know anything about the cloud. They don't have to know anything about how the service works. They're just going to be presented with an additional prompt, if you require it, at the command line, which they can respond to. They can respond to any one of the three challenges that are presented there. In this case, they've entered a SMS code, basically, that was sent over to their mobile authenticator application on their iPhone or Android phone. Optionally, they could also just click the Approve button on the Centrify app that's securely managed on their mobile phone, the one they use in their enterprise environment. The second major feature we've added is local account provisioning. You can now create and delete automatically privileged local accounts across your Linux environment, Linux and Unix environment. This gives you the ability to simply, again, through the zone hierarchy, to say, for example, if you have 16 database servers in a cluster, you need to create a specific local account, the type of account that has to be local for technical reasons because of the way the application or service is built. You can ask the Centrify agent to provision those automatically. When those machines are removed from the role, those accounts will be deleted automatically as well. So this is a terrific operational implementation of very much a set and forget capability to create and manage these local accounts. In addition, you can secure these local account passwords automatically when these accounts are created by the Centrify agent on the local machine. There's a notification callout script. We provide a script with Service Suite that enables our privilege service, cloud-based shared account password management service, to take those local accounts and passwords under management automatically as they're created. Because the script is a generic implementation, you can actually write your own scripts or have a development DevOps make one for you that connects either to your own password manager or to any other system you'd like to be notified and work with upon creation or deletion of those local accounts. The third major feature that I just want to highlight is the new reporting services for Standard Edition. This enables a lot of wonderful new stuff from a reporting perspective, including the scheduled automatic periodic scheduled delivery of reports to people's mailboxes, reports with graphs and charts. Its integration with SQL Server reporting services allows you to use any of Microsoft's standard development tools, visual layout tools to create your own reports. And in addition, we have externalized about 30 or 35 views inside the database which holds this DirectManage and DirectAuthorize information. As a result, you can now apply any external business intelligence tool to the data. We've documented the schemas. For these views, we've included it with the user documentation. If you want to use Tableau, if you want to use Crystal, any of Microsoft's tools, any BI tool you can use to generate reports from Standard Edition with this new report services feature. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to my friend and colleague, Hubert Siegler, who will take us through the rest of the presentation with an overview of the specifics of each of the different major components of Server Suite Standard Edition and Server Suite Enterprise Edition, including Direct Control, DirectManage, the Windows agent, and of course DirectAudit, the auditing infrastructure. Hubert?
Thank you, Brad. This is Hubert Siegler with Centrify Support. It's my pleasure to do the technical rundown of the new features and changes in Centrify Server Suite 2016. Before I begin, here's a brief look at the agenda of what I'll be talking about, starting with Direct Control. Okay, so as mentioned by Brad, we have several new major features introduced in Centrify Direct Control, and the product at large, starting with multi-factor or step-up authentication, local account management, reporting services, and I'll also discuss the changes to the various agent components, which we already have, discuss general updates, and briefly mention the changes to the support of platforms. Okay, beginning with multi-factor authentication. So Brad has already given the general overview of what multi-factor authentication is about, and I'll briefly address some of the requirements and other questions you may have regarding the deployment of the MFA feature. So the first and foremost is that it is supported in this release for 80 users in a hierarchical zone on Linux systems. So by that implication, Classic Zone and non-Linux systems, AIX, HPUX, Solaris, for example, are not currently supported in this initial release, though they are in the roadmap. And specifically, the MFA is tied into the PAM layer. So for multi-factor authentication, any PAM-enabled application can utilize MFA. So login, SSH are very common applications of PAM, but any PAM-enabled application would be able to, or I should say, should be able to leverage MFA, along with, of course, our own privilege management DZ-do command. Next, it requires a tenant on the Centrify Cloud, or CIS as we refer to it, and a cloud connector installed on the same network as your domain controller. If you're new to Centrify Cloud, it's our own homegrown cloud identity management solution, which is we feel a fantastic complement to the CSS product group. And as of this release, it is a requirement for the MFA. So if you have other third-party multi-factor authentication solutions, hang tight for further announcements. But for now, you have to register a tenant on the Centrify Cloud. Secondly, I list the challenges that are available to you if you enable multi-factor authentication in addition to passwords. So, currently, right now, you are familiar with the standard password authentication. As the second challenge, you can present any of the following options I've listed on the slide, such as our own Centrify mobile app. Have an SMS message with the authentication code, have it call a mobile number or other phone number so you can authenticate through that method, have an email sent to your own inbox to verify, and lastly, you can have a security question presented as that second challenge. And all these are optional and may be configured within the product. Finally, we have support for a rescue or backup login role that can be enabled in the event you have in the event there's a cloud connectivity issue. So, for example, you can configure for your administrators or for your users at large, you can enable the ability to log in those cases. Okay, up on the screen right now is another example of multi-factor authentication. This one is done over SSH using, and I mentioned PAM again as an example because I want to stress where the linkage to the MFA resides. So as you can see here, I'm logging in as a user. I presented my AD password, and I'm then presented with a second challenge. And you can see I can, as this user, I can choose one of several options that are presented to me, and I can choose whichever one I prefer. Having answered that challenge, I would then see the shell prompt as you typically would expect using direct control. Okay, here is an example of using DZ-Do for privilege elevation and combined with multi-factor authentication. Now, I should note this is merely one combination that you can do, but I wanted to demonstrate both DZ-Do, privilege elevation along with our mobile app, which is I think a pretty strong combination to use. So on the login screen, you can see I have invoked cat Etsy shadow, which is a privilege, which requires privilege elevation. I was prompted for my AD password. Upon entering that, I was supplied with a list of choices, and here you notice I had on option 1, I can do Centrify Mobile Authenticator, and upon choosing that, selecting that, shortly after on my phone, the display on the right appears. I don't have to open the app. It just is presented to me, and I can either approve or deny, depending on, of course, the context. And here, of course, I hit approve. And then upon doing that, I just have to hit the enter key as instructed on the login screen. And then the command, I would see the command output essentially after hitting the enter key. So pretty slick, pretty smooth, and again, I've seamlessly implemented multi-factor authentication in direct control. Okay, moving on to our next big feature, local account management. So as Brad explained, we can now provision local users on the direct control system, and these accounts can be managed from AD via our Access Manager. So if you're familiar with our Access Manager, familiar with how to manage hierarchical zones, you're most of the way there. There's just simply an additional facility now to specify local users and local groups, and the information is stored on AD for retrieval by your agents that are joined to the domain. I list some examples of accounts that of local accounts you can manage. But I think this is, if you have a large environment and want to normalize your local accounts, this is a great option. On the right side, if you see the example of a profile that is this is the screen you'll be presented with when provisioning a local user. On the bottom part, you can see there are 3 states: enable, disable, and remove user from Etsy password. There's several options available to you if you want to manage these accounts, including disable them. Lastly, also, there's an example below of some local users that I provisioned and how they're naturally integrated into the Unix system via this feature. Finally, there is a call out to. There's a feature which does a call out to any script of your choosing to complete the provisioning of the user. Since this mainly applies to the provisioning of the user itself in NSS. There may be other things you would like to do, such as set up a password, create a home directory, and you can set up a call-out script. And in the event in the event you are in need of a solution, we have some ready built-in scripts to integrate this with our Centrify Privilege Service or CPS product. So you can, provision an account via Access Manager and then call out a script to actually register and manage the password via our CPS service. So nice integrated solution there. On to Centrify Report Services, which again, as already explained, is a brand new component. From a technical level, it's included with the DirectManage installer. So just like you would install DirectManage, Access Manager, Deployment Manager, etc., it's another component in that install wizard. The Centrify Reporting Services leverages SSRS or SQL reporting services to deliver this web-based reporting solution. And from a technical level, the way it does it is it synchronizes a subset of 80 users, groups, and of course our own zone data into a reporting database, which generates, which is presented via views, as Brad already discussed. And built into the product are pre-canned reports, including new ones which weren't around before, so we're pretty excited to announce that we'll have some ready-built PCI and SOX compliance reports ready to go to present to for your auditors to use, so they can go in and run these reports without any additional configuration. Of course, we'll include support for customized reporting. So if you plan to use SSRS for your reporting needs, you can use the tools within that to define your own custom reports, and we'll provide the tools to do that. And then finally, and I think this is another strong feature, is that Access Manager is not required to view the reports. So as I mentioned above, this is a web-based reporting solution, and of course that means you can open up your browser, so you no longer have to give the Access Manager installer to an auditor, for example. You can just point them to a URL, and then they go there and run the reports that they require for for their purposes. So I think that's a good step up from before. Okay. Here now is an example on the left of the tool that you would use to configure reporting services. On the right is the end user experience, or the client. So you can see on the left is a services control panel, similar to other products that we've had, other Windows-based products, and you can see there's some various statistics, such as database server, last time it synchronized with Active Directory, etc. And there are other places. There's of course a setup wizard to walk you through this, but I do recommend reviewing the reporting services guide to review all the requirements and particularly hardware requirements, because as you may or may not know, SSRS does carry some pretty high, relatively high hardware requirements to run. And I should note that all this is done in the service of performance. So once this is all set up and your database is built, your information is synchronized, you can run these reports much faster. I would say significantly faster than with Access Manager previously. And I should mention, you can set the schedule from which you synchronize. I believe the default is a daily synchronize, but you can adjust that to weekly and adjust the interval as you need via the control panel. Over on the right, that's the experience that someone, a client or someone who would consume these reports would view after typing in the URL to the SSRS service, and you can see the various reports that can be run via the client. Okay. Next, we have just one of several reports that are included with Centrify Report Services. As you can see, on many of our reports, we have rich content and a lot of options to drill down into the information that you need. Okay, next over on to the agent components, and we're over to the existing agent components we have, focusing now on the changes to our existing core components. Starting with LDAP proxy, we've added a switch to LDAP search to provide some additional attribute if so needed. Next, over on to Centrify Open SSH. I'm very happy to report that we've updated our Open SSH to 7.1 P1, which, in case you're not aware, there were a number of security vulnerabilities that have appeared in the wild on previous versions of OpenSSH that caused some concern in the market, and by adopting this OpenSSH, we've addressed those security vulnerabilities. And with some additional modifications that you can see there, support for protocol version 1. As you may or may not know, in OpenSSH, a lot of the legacy encryption and protocols were taken out in order to harden OpenSSH. However, we feel some customers may require leaving those on, so we support SSH Protocol 1. We have a new parameter and some updates to existing parameters, which I would encourage you to look into to go into the release notes if you're interested in those. Also worth noting is that it's no longer installed by default if using our install sh script. And if you wish to install it, and this applies to a new installation, I should be clear on, you have to use the custom option or install the package manually in order to apply it. If for existing installations where you're upgrading and the installer detects that you're using Centrify OpenSSH, it will automatically upgrade it. So no need to worry, no need to use the custom option if you're upgrading your existing environment. Again, this only applies to new installations. And then finally, I should also note that if you're using the AIX platform, that we have a number of fixes to the known issues in the existing AIX OpenSSH service. So you may want to continue using Centrify OpenSSH, particularly if you're on the AIX platform. Okay, now on to some more general updates to the product. There's a new user right called User is Visible, which for those Centrify veterans will recognize as the listed role. So we felt the need to implement this due to the nature of the listed role, that it was not specifically mentioned. So now when you do a DZInfo or some other similar command to find out the roles, the listed role now will appear as user is visible, so that it's a clear designation that this user has been granted a role similar to how we refer to as listed. We also have a bunch of new options to existing commands. So for AD-info and AD-flush, we now have new switches for the purpose of diagnosing cloud connectivity issues because of the new MFA feature, of course. So definitely worth knowing those if you're looking to opt to use MFA. We also have a new option in AD-key tab that has also been requested by other customers. And then we also have updated our the bundled OpenSSL component and curl. And then lastly, we made some changes to how CA root certificates are stored on Red Hat. Okay, and here I will briefly show the update to our supported platforms. I won't list all the platforms here by name, but I will call out some of the ones of interest. So for Red Hat, we now support 7.2. Which was released back in last November of last year, I believe. So I'm sure that's welcome news. There's no CentOS 7.2 to speak of at the moment, but I'm sure I believe it's due out shortly. as far as platforms that are at end of life, you will note here we list 32-bit Windows. I should clarify this is specifically concerns DirectManage. So if you were installing the DirectManage tools on Windows XP or 32-bit or 32-bit Windows 2008 or even Vista, you will need to transition to a 64-bit Windows OS at this point. At this point, 64-bit Windows is pretty prevalent now, so we felt this was the right juncture to discontinue support for 32-bit Windows. And you'll note when you go to the Download Center, you will no longer see a 32-bit option, and that is why that is also would explain this. So going forward, we only support 64-bit Windows platforms for our management tools. Okay, and also briefly note that although not end of life, the OSs on the right two columns are going to be sunsetted, including some versions of HP UX and Oracle Solaris 9. Okay, on to Centrify DirectManage. Okay, so starting with the Access Manager component, we now require Windows 7 as Service Pack 1 and 2008 R2 if you are using those platforms. So make note of that if you're using one of the other, if you're not using the current iterations of those platforms. Also of note is that documentation is no longer installed during the install wizard. However, it's still present in the documentation subfolder. So when you download the package, you will still see the documentation folder. It just won't be installed after you perform the setup wizard. Install wizard. We now have support for managed service accounts, which is pretty happy to see. This is a long-standing feature in Active Directory for the management of the password management of service accounts. So glad to see that support has been added. We also a welcome change for some of our veteran Centrify admins is the ability to delegate zone control to multiple zones at once using the common shift-click or control-click entry. For environments that have lots of zones and need to delegate them, it was once per zone affair, and now you can select multiple at once. So I'm sure that will be a welcome change. And then the script that generated the Centrify OU structure, or we call it the Centrify recommended deployment structure, is now integrated into the setup wizard. So you no longer need to cancel the setup wizard to utilize that wizard. So also a welcome change. Onto the Report Center, which comes bundled into Access Manager. It should be noted now that with the advent of the report services, the Report Center is now being disabled by default in Access Manager. So upon installing the new Access Manager, you might see the Report Center is not there. No need to fret. You can easily go into the options of the tool and re-enable the Report Center. So the reports are still there, but it should be noted that the Report Center is planned to be replaced by the report services. But at this juncture, we will support both. So not to fret, but going forward, we encourage you to transition to the Centrify Report Services component. Okay, on to the other DirectManage components for PowerShell. We've updated it to support we updated to be built on the latest .NET framework. I should note that for all the DirectManage components where applicable, they have been updated to .NET Framework 4.5. So another welcome change for this component. It now has support for ZPA, so if you wish to use PowerShell commandlets to configure ZPA, you may do so now. Support for the new user is visible system right in PowerShell, and some new enhancements to one of our commandlets. Over to this zone provisioning agent, the one notable change here is that we now support managed service accounts from this service. So if you are utilizing managed service accounts, you'll be pleased to know that you can utilize one of those for the ZPA service account. And then for the group policy extensions, we no longer support the legacy ADM template format and only support the newer, in favor of the newer ADMX template format in the group policy management console. Okay, and then finally with Deployment Manager, some notable changes. We now have support for public key authentication as opposed to password auth. In addition to password auth in the previous release, some changes to the Managed Software Wizard and also to the Managed Audit Wizard. You can now change the installation name via the Deployment Manager. You no longer have to go into the console to do this. You can do this now from Deployment Manager. Okay. Okay, and then DirectAudit. Okay, so with DirectAudit, for those you watching now or watching later, it should be noted that in Suite 2016 while there are no major features introduced in this release of Centrify Server Suite, there are a number of less major but still significant enhancements to DirectAudit. So overall, I think it's a significant release and definitely encouraged to install to take advantage of the new features that are introduced. To the changes that were introduced in Server Suite 2016. If you're using DirectAudit, all welcome changes. Personally, from my point of view. So on to the general one. So much like Access Manager, if you're installing the audit console tools, the documentation will no longer be bundled there, but they will be present on the downloaded install package. Another big feature is we have some better resiliency at the agent level. Before, if there was even a momentary loss of connection to the collector, it would be reported on the DA info and would trigger a lot of false alarms, especially if the connection was quickly reestablished. So now the agent will wait will make several attempts before determining that it's disconnected from the collector. So that way, so there's less incidence of false alarms. Also, the agent has now an option to configure it to prefer collectors in the local AD site, and this was a hugely requested feature, particularly if you want to load balance and also optimize the performance of your collectors and the agents. Another significant change is the ability to enable or disable video capture on a per system basis. I'm very excited about this change because before, in order to do this, you had to do it at the install level, so it was an all or nothing affair. Now we support granular enabling, disabling of that at the agent level. It's an agent parameter, but I'm glad that it's there because it was also another highly requested feature. Also, on the high on the list of requests was the ability to control the host name that is presented to the collector when auditing session streams. So before, if you were using a NAT environment or if you are in an environment where the IP address is not stable, then it can result in it being logged multiple times or it being shown multiple times in the DA analyzer, so it made it a little difficult to sort of correlate what system this session was audited on. You can now override that via this parameter and specify a host name so that regardless of the IP that's presented to the collector, it will always show up. It will always show up as the same host name. So it makes organizing your sessions in DA Analyzer a lot more effective. Should you need this feature. I should note it's disabled by default for security reasons. Next is the in the bundling of the download, we now ship with MS SQL Server 2008 R2 SP2 Express with advanced services. Yep, so that's all. That's another addition, another change. And then just in general, we've improved audit trail despooling performance overall throughout the product. What I mean is via the collector, agent, etc. Okay. Now on to the collector-specific changes. There's a new registry key, skip first snapshot, which will help in situations where you have multiple logins of very brief Unix sessions, and you don't want to. And this happens to such a large scale that having that first snapshot in the database actually contributes significantly to the database size. You can now implement this and skip that snapshot and significantly reduce your database overhead. So, good change, a welcome change in high-scale environments. We have some enhancements to how we recognize commands. So oftentimes, not oftentimes, but occasionally if you open up a man page or did certain commands, the contents would be interpreted as commands, and that we've cleaned up how those are interpreted. Okay, on to the Audit Analyzer. Now in the Audit Analyzer, any auditor or user that has access to the Audit Analyzer but not to the Audit Manager can now delegate permissions to sessions that they have full control over to additional reviewers. So without having to funnel the requests to the Audit Manager, they can now delegate the ability to review and mark sessions without, on their own, if that is desired. So the ability, I should note though that even if this can be delegated, at no point will the reviewer have the ability to delete sessions using this feature. This only applies to the review of audit sessions. Over onto the Audit Manager, there are no new enhancements to speak of specific to this component in this release. And then for the DirectAudit agent for Unix, we have some parameters that are in support of the new features that I discussed. So for example, for the resiliency, that collector connect timeout is what you would adjust if you want to increase or decrease the sensitivity of the disconnect state. DA reload is another welcome feature if you want to bind to another collector immediately. This is particularly welcome in large environments where there's an outage or some situation that arises that points all your audit agents to one collector before there's no easy way to switch it to another collector. Now you can do it via this command. We also have better protection against simultaneous edits of NSS and PAM config files. There were some conflicts that have been identified, and which resulted in us strengthening these edits. Also, on the DA info side, there's a new switch-q, which is useful if you want to limit the output that you see from DA info. So, for example, if all you want to know is the connection state, the state of the agent, if you want to know the state of the collector, what collector it's connected to, you can just receive just specifically that information. So similar to how AD-info Y. So if you're familiar with that command, this is a welcome feature as well. Okay, on to the database itself. So there's now a new scheduled task in the component in the Audit Manager server service that collects DA licensing information from the DA database and stores this into Active Directory. The reason we're doing this now is to make it make the running of the deployment report more accessible to the user that's actually running it. So typically the person running the deployment report is not a DirectAudit admin, so often they would have to tap the shoulder of the DirectAudit admin, have them run the deployment report on their end just to get the licensing information. So this facilitates true independence for the person tasked with running the deployment report, and this is, I think, a very welcome change. Makes it a lot easier to generate and distribute the deployment report output. We've also improved the database itself, the performance of the database itself, through some additional indexes to reduce CPU load on the SQL Server. For the Find Sessions tool, for those using it, we've improved the performance of that. And then for the DirectAudit agent for Windows, we have some new group policy settings to control some very commonly adjusted registry settings on the DirectAudit agent for Windows. And then over to the PowerShell module for DirectAudit, we have some new commandlets that reflect the changes made on the previous session I showed with the delegation to review sessions. Some new welcome commandlets at the PowerShell module. Okay. And finally, we come to the Centrify Windows agent. Note the name of the agent now. I believe previously we called it DirectAuthorize for Windows, and now we're made a slight change to the name. So if you see that in our documentation, this will help to clarify that. So over to the Access component, which, as I mentioned, was formerly known as DirectAuthorize. The contextual menu, where you would right-click to run a command as a role, now shows Run with Privilege instead of Run as Role. Notable change there. Again, same as with the other Windows components, documentation not included during the install, but present on the package download. And this is a feature I'm personally really excited about. The Privileged Desktop has made a comeback and is now supported on Windows 8 and Windows 8 2012 and related platforms. So very happy to see that. So if you were missing the ability to have a privileged desktop in the you were a fan of it in Windows 7 2008 and were a bit dismayed at not seeing that in Windows 8 of 2012. You can now deploy the privileged desktop again in this OS, and I'll demonstrate that briefly in the next slide. Next, and this was also a request feature, the desktop label or the tattoo that would show you what desktop you were in. So if you wanted to see, default desktop or whatever privileged desktop you had, it now appears as a systray notification as opposed to a permanent mark on the desktop. And this can, of course, be controlled via group policy. For those wanting to join the agent to a zone without circumventing the GUI, you may now do so using the new CLI command dzjoin. So also happy to have that feature, happy to have that command. We also have simplified the Run with Privilege functionality. And then, and this is also notable as well going forward, for privileged desktop, we now favor setting up privileged desktops to provide users a group context rather than a user context. So to briefly explain, if you previously elevated someone's privilege through privileged desktop and used the local administrator account, for example, we now favor elevation via group association. So now, rather than use the administrator account, use the built-in administrators group to elevate their privilege. And that's due to issues that we've identified in the Centrify Windows agent. Okay, here is an example of the new privileged desktop in Windows 8 and Windows 2012, which I'm very happy to see. You'll note on the lower left-hand corner, there's a Centrify logo indicating that this is a Centrify privileged desktop. And you can see briefly how the start menu looks like. Some slight cosmetic differences from a standard Windows desktop, but functionally it is the equivalent of a standard Windows desktop. So so again, glad to see that functionality return on this operating system. Over to the desktop label. Here I'm showing you, just for context, an example of how the desktop label worked in the previous version of the Windows agent. You can see the name of the desktop, surrounded by a black bar, which is very visible and is persistent label. And if I switching over to how it newly appears, you can see now it is a notification, a sort of a floating notification now, and if you see it's kind of fading, that's because if you want to see it, you can click on the Centrify logo on the Centrify systray icon on the lower right. It'll briefly appear and then go away, and then you won't see it until you request to see it. So that's hopefully a helpful visual representation of how it appears. Okay, and then on to the audit component of the Windows agent. There are some new group policy settings to adjust the auditing of the Windows agent. And then also worth noting, on the auditing side, we now support the Metro UI and tile applications in Windows 8 2012. So as you can see, we've really made some major strides in the support of Windows 8 and 2012 in this release. So hopefully this will renew interest and utilization of this component on Windows 8 and 2012. We also support, much like the Unix agent, the option to prefer collectors in the same site as with Unix agents. So again, also good to have that change in the Windows agent side. And then, of course, there were, as I mentioned before, audit trail despooling performance enhancements, which have also been incorporated in the Centrify Windows agent. Okay. So in closing, okay, as far as where to go if you need more information on the new features and changes in Centrify Server Suite, you can go to our general announcement on the website. You can also download the release notes also as well, and view view all the details of all the changes. And then, of course, you can download the new version. We encourage everyone to go to our download center and download and review the documentation and try out the new features in Suite 2016. This presentation will also be provided to our customers. Okay, and that concludes this presentation. Thank you for joining today's webinar on what's new in Centrify Server Suite 2016. If you have any questions about today's presentation, please post them in our community at community.centrify.com or reach out directly to Centrify support. Have a great day, everyone.